Welcome back again. As a reminder, my name's Carlos, and I'd like to introduce Cameron Esdaile. We look after the AAA of product management here in Aruba, as Kirti mentioned, and just want to run through a few demos. We talked about some of the different scenarios for provisioning and policy a couple of days ago, and so we want to actually show you a few of those in action. For those of you out on the interwebs, you can download the presentations that we gave a couple of days ago to give a bit of extra context. So hopefully the clicker will work from here. There we go. So I just wanted to touch again on a couple of points that were made earlier by Kirti, and from our perspective, provisioning, security, policy shouldn't just be exclusive to BYOD. We really need to think about this, company-wide, as the dominant type of device starts being the wireless device or the mobile device, and not the sort of desktop PC that you're using. So what we're going to concentrate a bit on with the demos today is on this sort of onboarding side of things. So how do we get people on that network? We all know Aruba has some very good security controls inside its controllers and virtual controllers that enable us to enforce different policy. So we're going to concentrate a little bit more on this side of things today, so that we can show you a few different use cases. So to start off as well, before I jump into a couple of demos, I want to talk about the workflow side of things in terms of getting people onto the network, because at the end of the day, this is all about structuring a kind of a workflow for the different users, the different devices. And just want to throw up a sample of, these are some of the things that we've been doing with AmigoPod for years. And really, it does form the foundation for an onboarding mechanism for your staff or employees, because at the end of the day, bring your own device is not just limited to your staff, obviously, right? Guess you guys have all, or some of you have registered. So visitor self-registration, this is, like your typical hotspot, I guess, fill in some details and you get access to the network. We've got a slight twist on that, which we're going to talk to you about, which is, putting in a sponsor approval system in the middle of that registration phase, so that you can automate 99% of the actual provisioning and have somebody such as a help desk or the person that you're visiting actually put that final piece of authorization in place, because some companies are not comfortable with 100% self-registration. Anybody can get onto my network, right? We're also going to show you, BYOD for employees with regards to provisioning, a Windows laptop for connectivity to an 802.1x network, configuration of that supplicant. We can do that for Android, for iOS, for OS X as well. And just a couple of the other modes that we have, we can generate, scratch cards and import in a list of delegates for a conference and email everybody account details, so that you're not using a common username and password or shared credentials and things like that. And we do also offer XML and SOAP APIs. We've got lots of customers that actually use existing applications or workflows that they have to trigger the provisioning of guest access. So one of the best examples that I like to use is a hospital customer of ours in Sydney, Australia, who has tied in guest provisioning with their patient check-in system. So as you go to the hospital and you say, I've got to be here for an operation or whatever, as they're keying in your details into their actual Windows-based patient check-in system, when they hit go, a message, an XML message goes to AmigoPod. We provision an account and send back a response. And that patient has a patient number as their username and a 4-digit PIN as a password, on their bracelet whilst they're at the hospital, and they can actually access the wireless network. When they get checked out of that system, or the reverse happens, a request goes, they get, the account gets deleted, and they're no longer allowed access. So you have not had to train a single doctor, nurse, IT person on how to provision access, and yet you've automated it into the actual workflow of checking patients into the hospital. So these are the kinds of things that we can do with this interactive system. So I'm probably going to show you the guest access with sponsor approval. So I'm just going to highlight what the workflow is going to be, and then we'll actually show you guys. We're going to flip over, and we've got a couple of iPads and laptops to show you what it all means. So the idea is I connect to an SSID and I complete my details, including a sponsor field, which is the email address of the person that I'm coming to visit. Now you can actually potentially hard code that as a help desk sort of a distribution list, or for for certain HR people or whatever it may be. But the idea is you fill in your credentials, and AmigoPod will provision your account in a disabled state, right? So we'll provision your account, but it's actually disabled. What happens at that point is that AmigoPod will send an email to your sponsor saying, hey, Carlos has turned up and he's requested, internet access. Do you want to approve it or not? So it's a simple, confirm or deny, right? It doesn't take too much time. It's not erroneous. You can distribute this amongst people in your organization. We can then click that confirm. AmigoPod sees that that's been confirmed and then enables the account and notifies the user via an SMS or via email or by refreshing the page, which is what we're going to show you guys now. So I'm going to just duck out of here and associate to all right, so if I go onto this network here. Okay, so if I open up a web browser and try to go to Google or something, we'll get the typical, put in your username and password. So let's put in Carlos, my phone number, my email address. We can add a simple little survey, to actually capture some information. So I'm going to say here, I'm here for an executive briefing, and I want to register for access. Okay, so we've provisioned that account in a disabled state, as you can see, and it's telling us to wait, for the account to be enabled. You can obviously personalize all of that. If we actually just look over to the other screen here, you will see we've got an email set up that's been, created and sent.
So yeah, what you can see here is this email account was set up as the sponsor of the guest access for this particular demo that we're doing here. So as soon as the registration completed there, the email requesting authorization for this guest access was sent through. Simply click on the page. We get up a confirmation page where the sponsor has the choice to confirm the details, and then if they're happy with who it is coming in, click confirm.
Yeah.
And essentially the account has been activated. Carlos should have got an SMS on his phone with the receipt details.
There it is, to prove it's not smoke and mirrors. And you can see now that I've actually, the login button has now actually been enabled. So if I now click on, log in, you say, hello Carlos. You can actually personalize things, make it a little bit more, personal than your typical captive portal. I can click to continue browsing the web. Obviously, we can leave that holding page up so you can see, your stats and your usage. So very, very simple, and really that is still a very, very important BYOD requirement because guests are always bringing in their own devices.
Yeah,
yes.
So this is similar to the experience that we all had today when we came in, and I've had my machine up and running and been using it, and my counters aren't going up.
Which network are you on?
This exact same page on the SSID.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could be just interim accounting mightn't be enabled on that particular controller. So thanks for catching it, and we'll have a look at that.
Yeah, we've just set this up for a demo. It's not on the live network that we have. The EBC network is a completely different one. Sorry?
Those are supposed to work.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, that's just gets updated with Radius accounting information.
Way to break it, Sam.
Well,
and what we can do here is if your customer chooses to deploy a usage quota, we can actually display that this guest has been allocated 100 megabytes worth of download, and we can actually show them how much they're eating into that quota. The other thing to note here with this self-registration process, you guys have probably seen self-registration technologies from some of the other vendors. One of the unique things we're doing is you saw that login button. So what we've tried to do is make the user experience as clean as possible. So What that basically is doing is taking the credentials that were created and allowing the user just to click log in and go through. They get the SMS with the details if they want to log in later on, the next day or whatever it is. With some of the other solutions in the market, you'll see that the self-registration will complete. The user's then redirected to a login page, then they have to actually enter them in again. So we really pride ourselves on getting that workflow as clean and as simple as possible for the guest users.
Okay, so I'm just going to connect.
I had one question on that demo is the guest puts in the email address of who they want to sponsor them.
So
is there any validation that that's the right person to be the sponsor, or that that's an actual valid email address?
Yes.
What if they put it? What if they
that's a very good point. So we actually have controls in there that you can restrict the domains that you can send to or from, so that I can't sponsor myself via Gmail, for example. Which is, so yes, we do have those absolute controls. We do also have the ability to sort of query the LDAP server for the email address as well, so you can type it in and it can validate it.
Okay.
Can it be locked down to just only go to a specific IT help desk, for example?
Absolutely.
That's
yes.
what we did here.
That's actually what we did here.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
We set it up basically, because this is coming from our proof of concept facility, the sponsor's hard coded as our POC manager. So.
Okay, so let's go back. Yeah, so just showcasing a little bit again what we've done. So the second demo that we wanted to show you guys was around another BYOD example, but this time using a Windows 7 laptop and configuring an 802.1x supplicant on it so that it can connect to a PEEP network. Cam? So this guy here?
Yep.
Do you want to?
Okay.
So hold on, we've just got to do a bit of
shuffling of
computers.
Where's this thing?
Cool.
Okay, so what we want to show you here is a typical example of somebody bringing, their Windows computer into the environment and wanting to get that onto the network securely. So the challenge here, obviously, is you guys are probably familiar with the Windows supplicants aren't the easiest things to configure. So one of the great technologies we picked up out of the vendor acquisition is basically an auto configuration utility that allows you to do mass deployments of 802.1x. And the whole goal there is to really avoid, IT being involved in that provisioning process, or having a flood of help desk calls. And this is incredibly popular in the education sort of market because they are the classic BYOD customer for many, many years before it became an issue in enterprise. So what we're going to show you here is essentially that onboarding process of a Windows device. And the whole goal here is that IT shouldn't be involved. So what we're going to do is connect to that same guest SSID, but what we'll do is actually, there's an option on that registration page to basically click on a link if you already have an account. So that same process can be used by guests or employees in what we've set up. If you log in as an employee, we're going to detect that it's a BYOD device and force you into an enrollment process. And what's actually going to happen is we're going to redirect the device to a provisioning page. So we've used basically some of the technology that we've got from a vendor to create a package that we can install on a web server. And that package has installers for various different operating systems that goes about configuring the supplicant. It will push any required service certificates you need to actually complete the 802.1x transaction. So what we're going to do is, you can see at the bottom, this is the same workflow that Carlos just went through. We're going to click to sign in. And what we're going to do is pick one of the employees in the back-end Active Directory. We've got an AD here that's got 15 employee accounts. The first 5, 1 through 5, are tagged as executives in their group membership, and the balance are just regular employees. And what we are actually going to do is show that we can not only differentiate the device, but the class of user. So you can see there that we connected to the guest SSID, but because an employee logged in, because we integrated with the Active Directory, we detected that and changed the role. And if you guys have a quick look over here on the screen, I think you're logged in as employee 3. So you can see employee 3 on the Aruba controller dashboard here has been placed in a BYOD enroll state. So it hasn't got guest access. It was detected as a BYOD device and placed into an enrollment state. So what that means is when Carlos opened his web browser, he was automatically redirected to our configuration portal. So IT hasn't had any involvement in this process so far.
Right, see how I just tried to go to Google then or go anywhere else and it redirected me again.
So what this page here is doing is browser detection. So if I connected with a Mac or with any other different operating system, whether it be an Android, it's actually going to detect and push me a different dissolvable client to actually go through and configure the supplicant. And built into that client is all of the configuration details for our environment. So we're going to get this guy onto the POC employee 802.1x SSID. So if we click Start, we've got the dissolvable agent here. We haven't actually got it signed, so it picked up that Microsoft warning. So we basically click through Next. What we're doing here now is basically authorizing to the AD to see if this particular user's got the privileges to actually enroll their device onto the network. It's also going to check their group memberships to figure that out. So we click Next. What it's done is it's configured the wireless stack. If we click Connect, what it's going to do is actually drop it off the guest network and reconnect it to the employee 802.1x network. So we can see it's connected here. It's got an IP address. And if we check our controller again, we can see that it's been given the employee role there. So that's essentially showing you that without any interaction from the IT department or any involvement from a help desk call or logging a call, the user's been completely able to onboard their device without any interaction from the corporate entity. So that's one of our deployment models we wanted to show you. So I think the next one we wanted to do was...
Yeah, so I was just going to take a quick moment to show our viewers how we go about creating those packages. So if you see, this is we've logged into the Quick Connect, and you can see for the various different operating systems here how I'm able to configure common settings such as on Windows enable NAP service, the service, which supplicant to use. So we can actually push down the W2 supplicant for people that want to do TTLS. We can actually trigger the installation of an application after this happens as well. So in that case, if you want an employee that yes, we're going to connect you to that network, but we're also going to trigger the installation of maybe a piece of antivirus software or some corporate application or a Citrix VDI client or something along those lines. So that package can build not just for wireless but also for wired connections, so we can configure both your wired and your wireless supplicant. So I'm not going to run through all of the options, but you guys get the idea there. We can tie things into NAP, we can specify everything. So the idea is that the IT department can pre-configure all of these sorts of components. They can configure the policies on the controllers or on your sort of policy definition point, and then they can walk away. And you ask any university that has implemented this type of technology what an impact it's had on their help desk, and they'll tell you it's probably in the 90% sort of reduction rate in terms of these sorts of configuration issues. So let's learn from people that have done this on a very, very large scale. I mean, every enterprise department, every company would love to be able to reduce the complexity and the costs with regards to doing this.
Carlos?
Yes.
Has there been any really large environments that you've actually deployed this into?
Yeah, so this obviously comes to us from the a vendor acquisition. So they've done a very big deployment of this at Saudi Aramco, for example, who, you know, they've got over 65,000 endpoints. I'm not sure how many of them are using this, but yeah, absolutely. And we are obviously planning on having a lot more very large references in the coming months.
What's the breadth of key types that you support, or credential types?
Yeah, so built into it, obviously, we're attempting to configure the native supplicant in each operating system, but as Carlos showed, we do actually have the option just down here in the, if you scroll up a bit.
Sorry.
There's an option here to add additional supplicants.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, so we can add in, you know, the secure W2, so we can do a whole bunch of different supplicants depending on what the customer wants to do there. And obviously, yeah, we've got the ability to trigger application installs, you know, post the provisioning. So one of the common use cases for that is you provision the device onto the 802.1x network, but then you can potentially install a health and posture agent to do persistent, you know, checking of the health of that particular device on your network. So
okay.
Did you guys have any more questions on that sort of onboarding style solution? Because what we're going to show you next is maybe a refresher for some of you, but maybe it's new, is what we've been doing with Apple and leveraging their MDM APIs. So we're going to run you through that just as a bit of a refresher.
What are I see those operating systems that were listed there, Android or
Yeah, so Android basically is being published, I think, this week.
The 31st.
Yeah. So Windows Mobile, I'm not sure what the status is there, but I think we're probably going to, you know, move more towards the, you know, Windows Phone 7 and obviously what's happening with Windows 8. So this is essentially what we showed you guys here is the onboarding of the Windows device. What we want to now is just recap on something Carlos covered down in San Jose a couple of days ago, is, you know, that powerful API that Apple's afforded us built into the operating system that allows us to do a lot of stuff without that dissolvable cost, the APIs that are actually built into the operating system. So this is essentially the model of what we're doing, is that we're having an authentication flow that's going back to your corporate Active Directory. We've built certificate services into the AmigoPod platform, so it has a CA built into it. And that allows us to respond to certificate signing requests directly from the Apple operating systems. And once we've got that certificate enrollment process in place, we can then securely sign any of the configuration attributes that need to be pushed down to the device, which is quite a powerful architecture. So if we flick to the next slide, this is just going to give you guys a bit more detail of how this provisioning process actually works for us. So if you have a look, we've got essentially your typical sort of architecture of the Aruba infrastructure and then the AmigoPod basically sitting in your server farm in the back end. Your client's going to essentially associate to the network. We have device profiling or fingerprinting capabilities built into our controllers so we can detect the difference between classes of devices. In that case, if we detect what we consider to be a BYOD device, we can actually do some role derivation in the controller and actually determine that that particular user, like we showed you before, shouldn't go to the guest network, should actually be pushed off to our enrollment workflow. So that triggers that redirect to our enrollment page. From there, we can authorize that particular user against AD to see if they have been given, say, a group membership that allows them to onboard their own device. Once we've done that, what we do is we kick off this provisioning process using the MDM APIs from Apple. That allows us to interact with the certificate store on the device. It'll send us a SCEP request. We can actually sign that request. Once it's signed, we can actually then use the key infrastructure that we've built between the two to package up a unique payload that is inclusive of all of the Wi-Fi settings, and we've actually got a bunch of other settings that we're doing on the iOS devices, like set a passcode policy, prevent the user from deleting the actual profile if the administrator chooses to. We can potentially set some VPN configuration that our VIA client can actually reference. So,
Cameron, I just had a quick question about that last slide.
Sorry, I'll put it back up.
What infrastructure are you using to supply the PKI for the TLS certificates and the SIP support? Are you able to tie that into like an Active Directory PKI infrastructure in order to provision those?
So what we've tried to do is we built a CA into AmigoPod because a lot of customers out there haven't gone down the TLS path because it is, you know, it's a whole other level of understanding that you need in terms of building a PKI. So we've built one in true AmigoPod fashion. We've created a very clean user interface. We've made it very simple for people to understand and build an autonomous CA just for your BYOD devices. And we see a lot of our customers are quite happy to have a separate CA for BYOD in the same way as they'd have a separate guest database as opposed to their Active Directory. But for those that do want to integrate in and have potentially the same root CA that's signing all of their certificates, we can actually place AmigoPod in the certificate hierarchy as an intermediate or a subordinate. So we've got a lot of customers that are integrating in with Microsoft.
Okay, so it wouldn't be actually the Microsoft PKI architecture that's provisioning was set the certificates to the end device that would come from the AmigoPod itself?
Yeah, so we're set up as an intermediate CA, and what that allows us to do is actually put a lot of device inventory and authorization data directly into the certificate. And then what we can do with the Aruba infrastructure is use that inventory data to trigger authorization policy decisions. So we can actually look into it and potentially look at the serial number of the device that we've recovered via the API. We could then potentially reference an asset database and go, okay, so this is a corporate purchased iPad, so we're going to treat it differently to an employee purchased one. We do have the option through SCEP proxy to potentially proxy the request straight through to AD if a customer chose to want to have all of the certificates actually signed by their CA. So it depends, which side of the fence the customer wants to go, whether they want to have all the certificates in one place and do all the revocation through one console, or then we see another class of customers that like the separation.
Is there any loss of functionality to moving that from AmigoPod off into the Microsoft infrastructure?
The only challenge there is the difference in what is actually inside the client certificate. So because the Microsoft CA is actually signing it, it's not necessarily going to include some of those subject alt name attributes. We do have some mechanisms in our AAA servers to essentially cache some of the same details in what we call an endpoint table. So we can essentially replicate it, but in terms of it being embedded in the certificate, it is slightly different.
Are there really that many advantages to using that kind of certificate data instead of whatever you're traditionally using to apply policy to a user or device or
well, the way we sort of see it is, the certificate can become sort of a multi-dimensional credential. So it's not just who the user is. We've got those other characteristics in there, and we've got a very flexible, policy engine now as part of the vendor acquisition that allows us to make different decisions. So we completely separate the authentication from the authorization path. So that allows us to look at those details where with a traditional, say, PEEP transaction, it's very one-dimensional. It's username and password, it's on or off, So with this is allowing us to have that sort of multi-dimensional credential and make different decisions. And it's really just giving our customers flexibility because we can't tell you what a customer's policy is going to be. That, they always have different views of how devices should be admitted onto their network.
So if you inherently go right to TLS with this, right?
Absolutely. That's why we're provisioning a client cert, and we can use that for VPN authentication as well. ActiveSync could potentially use it as well. So there's a lot of, network access methods that can be used with that client certificate.
So you can see the sorts of things that we can embed into the actual certificate, which is specific to that actual device, which then the policy manager can pick up on, and you can centrally define policies because the certs are already out there, right? So you can, if you need to make a change on how this particular type of device or user or whatever is done, you can make that centrally, and then obviously when it picks up that from the certificate, it will enforce that. So I just want to make sure people understand that we have built a certificate authority, PKI in a box. That's no mean feat, and we can configure this probably quicker than you can actually install a Windows server for doing CA.
Now, this starts magically.
No mean feat.
Sorry?
And that itself is no mean feat.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I mean, we talk about, oh, yeah, certificates, this, that, and the other. You know, I just want to make sure everybody understands, you know, this is complex stuff, and we've turned it into a workflow that is incredibly intuitive for our end users, right? Which is what they demand.
Now, are the certs magically generated for that individual device?
Yeah, look, you could say magically, yeah, it's done in real time, yeah? So, you know, our engineers understand it a lot better than we do, so we think it's
we do call them magicians, I guess. Gurus, magicians.
So there's no third-party guy have to going in there, create the cert, push it out?
No.
No, we have actually had some customers, and we've got it on our roadmap to essentially have a similar sponsor approval workflow built into the certificate provisioning. So we've got the ability to essentially provision the cert, but have it in a revocation state until it's approved. So it's all done, the device is ready to go, and as soon as the administrator enables that cert, they can get onto the network.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why we talk about sort of BYOD and to some extent the evolution of guest access, and why it's so critical to have something that allows you to have very rich user interfaces and workflows and flexible in that sense, because in order to have this whole concept of zero IT or very reduced IT, you need to guide the users through a set of instructions that are very simple to use, and we think AmigoPod's the best in the business for that.
And are you marketing this separate from the Aruba solution? For example, let's say you have somebody who has a Cisco network.
Yeah, we actually do. We've seen quite a few large Cisco networks look at this as a comparative to what Cisco has to offer. And the provisioning aspect of what we have is incredibly powerful. So they're looking at an overlay on top of Cisco.
Hey, Cam, can you repeat that question? For live streaming, it's a little difficult sometimes to hear.
Yeah, sure. So the question was, are we selling it independent of the Aruba infrastructure? And yeah, and the answer is yes. Like what we are doing, is in the control plane. So we obviously get a lot more benefits when it's against Aruba infrastructure, because all of the context-based firewalls built into the Aruba controllers, we can trigger back, bandwidth contracts, stateful firewall policies, where with some of the other products on the market, you're limited to flipping a VLAN. So it can work on them, but it's the same difference architecturally at the controller level as you guys are well aware of, I guess.
Network services, by definition, has to be kind of multi-vendor in terms of what we're doing here. So do you want to run through the demo, Cam?
So I think just to finish off on that state diagram so everyone kind of understands where we're at. So essentially we got to this point where we're able to then securely provision the Wi-Fi settings, the VPN settings, passcode policies. Once that's done, we present the user with a status page and basically reconnect them to the corporate SSID, but instead of it being potentially PEEP, which is what most people are using today, it'll come across as a TLS transaction. And once they're connected, obviously they're free to go and do their web browsing. So I'm going to basically show you that now. So disconnect that. Okay, so here's our trusty iPad. So what we're going to do is, I guess unlike Windows, the supplicant built into iOS is pretty smart. It figures a lot of stuff out for you. There isn't a lot of checkboxes that you have to go and tick and select options to actually get onto a network. And this is actually one of the triggers for the BYOD concerns for most people, is with just an Active Directory user account, people can get these devices on. They don't have to be, an IT guru just to get the device onto the network. So essentially, I can come down here, and the POC employee is an 802.1x enabled network. So with my AD credentials, I can come in. We haven't got a signed cert on our Radius server because it's just in a lab environment.
Cameron, so I quite often get asked this by customers that I work with, is that particular process you just went through there where, say they've got a PEEP-based network set up, they get this pop-up to say accept. Of course, the user goes ahead and clicks accept, and you've got a device that they don't know about before that's automatically accepted a certificate that hasn't been installed by IT and is on the network, and people are going, how can we control somebody just bringing along an iPad or whatever and just automatically
doing exactly what we did?
Like that.
Yeah, so that's really one of the big things of Aruba's MDAC initiative that you guys would be familiar from last year. They built those smarts into the controller to have the device awareness. So the ability to be able to detect a device coming onto your network and figure out what type of device allows you to do something differently with it. And what you'll see here is I've connected up there. If you see employee 5, again, we've detected that that was a BYOD device and put it into that same enrollment state. So what that'll mean is when we web browse, we've been redirected. So we've been redirected to the Amigo Pod provisioning page. Obviously, we know it's an iOS device, so we can pretty much tap on the option there to configure our iOS device.
So just to recap on the fingerprinting as well. So we're doing fingerprinting of this device using DHCP fingerprinting, all right? No, not user agents that can be spoofed by web browser plugins and things like that. It's done using DHCP options, which is a very common way and quite difficult to actually sort of spoof as well.
What about DHCP options that can be spoofed?
Yeah, well, I guess when we look at...
I mean, that's easy to do, right? Yeah.
Not as easy as a browser agent or a host name or a Mac OUI.
Yeah, so I guess what we're looking at is... what's that?
Mac OUI smack and you're changed.
Oh, exactly, yeah. And look, some of our competitors use that as a profiling capability. Now, I guess what we're doing is looking at it at a more holistic level. And what we've got, obviously, with the introduction of a vendor is a whole other level of smarts that we can do for profiling. But what we've been doing with the DHCP fingerprinting is our controller reads both user agent and DHCP, but we only do role derivation off the actual DHCP fingerprint because inherently it's a lot harder for somebody to change the way the DHCP within a client operating system works than it is to download SMAC to change your MAC address or a plugin in your web browser to modify your user agent settings in the browser. But moving forward, as you guys will hear as some of the vendor technology rolls out, we've got an incredibly rich set of tools we have to basically narrow down to exactly what that device is. And one of the things that we actually, you probably just saw there, is those client certificates are a way of us profiling the device. We know it's an iPad because we've spoken to the client operating system. So when we provisioned a Windows laptop, we know it's a Windows laptop. So we're going to have a very definitive way of actually understanding what the device type is so we can create a true device-aware policy-based network. So what we're doing here is very similar to what you saw on the Windows dissolvable agent. We're going to authorize with the actual Active Directory. So I think we were employee 5.
Sure.
I don't think Active Directory is case sensitive, so that capital E should be okay.
Is this a secured page?
It can be.
At the moment,
yep.
no.
But we're coming over peak, so it's not, for some customers it's not that big a concern. If you're doing it over, say, a guest network that's open, pushing credentials, obviously, yeah, the best practice would be to have it secured by SSL. So at this point, we're triggering the API provisioning process. So if we go through, select to install the profile, this is when the whole SCEP process kicks in. You'll see up the top, it's installing the profile, it's done. We come back to a status page. And what you can see here, it's gone through and it's been able to pass the enrollment, it's installed the certificate, it's installed the Wi-Fi settings. And what we're doing here is on that same SSID. So we've connected on the POC employee SSID as PEEP. We're now going to click connect. And what the solution is going to do is basically disconnect us just temporarily from the PEEP network. And because we've got a TLS cert provisioned on there, it's going to reconnect back. And you'll see now that that guy that was in the enrollment state should have transitioned to a new role as employee 5. So we can see there's the employee No, yeah, that's it. So he's in the exec role. So what that basically means is we've also looked at the Active Directory as he authenticated via TLS and determined that he was in an executive group. So if we actually just go to the home screen, there's a speed test there.
Yep.
So we don't have a bandwidth contract on the executives, we do on the employees. So if it was an employee, somebody over employee 5, they would have been constrained to 1 megabit. This guy's an executive, so he's getting a full crack at the network. As you would, right? Got to keep the bosses happy. So what we've shown you there is basically a way to take, the flood of iOS devices coming onto the network, and without any IT intervention, put them onto the network through a nice clean workflow. We've provisioned a unique credential to the device, so a certificate that can be revoked. So if that device is stolen or the guy leaves the company, we can pull it without actually affecting his domain credentials. We don't have to do something at the domain level to stop that device getting on. And we've done that on a single SSID. So we're keeping the air clean by having a guest and an employee. We're not having to separate it out into a separate provisioning SSID.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you another question about that too. I get quite often asked the question of, we've got a set of devices that are corporate owned versus these other ones that are not corporate owned that are coming into the network. And we want to be able to differentiate the access to the network based on those two types of devices.
Sure.
So you've got one iPad here, one iPad here, but they're different.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, so what we're doing there is with that ability to pick up the device inventory data from the device, one of the attributes that we can get is the device serial number. And quite often, when corporates are rolling out iPads, they're going to have an asset tracking database where they're going to barcode scan that sort of data. And that's something that's incredibly hard to spoof, right? Like and it's the interesting thing. It's that, unlike a MAC address, is not handed over as part of an 802.1x transaction. We've got access to that because we're embedding it into a certificate. So what we can do by separating the auth and the authorization, authentication and authorization, we can actually pick up the TLS termination, look at the serial number in the certificate, and then do a SQL lookup to, say, a corporate asset database. And once we get that back, if that serial number is present, that can change our policy. So we can then hand back a different role to the Aruba controller, which obviously can change bandwidth, quality of service, firewall policy, whatever. Go ahead.
I applaud your live demos. I mean, right, you can actually see it working. But
yeah.
Got a question though, related to the Apple devices pushing and pulling profiles. Mm-hmm. Have you experienced problems with that?
Not really. Like I think there's two different ways people do it. So a lot of people will just host a .mobile config on a web server. It's just an XML file, right? And that's inherently not signed by a certificate that the actual device trusts. So quite often, that's where we've seen people in the field have issues. We've seen some customers try and handcraft this themselves. Because we're actually in the full SCEP certificate enrollment process, everything we push to the device is trusted because we're signing it with the public key of the iOS device. It's a completely collaborative process that we're going through. So yeah, we're not seeing those sorts of issues. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to in the field.
I'm in the midst of a large deployment.
Yep.
And I'm just trying to get some feedback with Apple devices. We've seen some interesting things, so I was just curious.
Look, that being said, we've seen some interesting changes in what Apple did from iOS 4 to iOS 5, right? So they changed the way that they reference, certificate trusts. So yeah, you definitely see things change as iOS versions move along, but it's nowhere as complex as navigating the Android world, right? Because you've not only got a base operating system, you've got a whole handful of OEM manufacturers that are doing different APIs and changing the way you access the operating system. So I think us as an industry are very fortunate that Apple have done such a great job on the API, and it's a really powerful architecture.
Well, so that's a really great point, right? Is that we've seen over the past couple of days everybody embracing Apple iOS and manipulating and MDM and everything based around this infrastructure that Apple has essentially handed everybody.
Sure.
What about everybody else?
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing. Like, you know, for a company that was very consumer orientated, they've got arguably the best enterprise story in terms of, you know, helping us solve these problems. And, you know, we can't sort of predict whether the other manufacturers are going to, you know, follow suit and provide that. But the reality now for manufacturers is you have to, you know, do that heavy lifting yourself with client software if you want to do it on another operating system. And that's obviously, you know, where, you know, a lot of the MDM players that we're partnered with, you know, come into play. You know, they've got those capabilities. And what we're focusing on at the moment is, you know, we believe there's still a market there for people that want to just onboard securely a device without actually taking administrative control of the device. And that's really what we're offering with our combination of what we've shown you here and the Windows onboarding, and we're, you know, obviously going to be able to do that with Android as well.
And just to point out as well, the same technology and APIs that we're using here for iPads and iPhones are now available in OS X Lion as well. So you can actually, you know, interact with, you know, with many of the laptops that you guys have here in exactly the same way. And, you know, again, we'll be able to configure wired or wireless in those cases. Obviously, the iPads don't have the wired connection. So that's, you know, again, a big benefit of the sort of OS X and iOS platforms.
You can go back to the profiling. Are you guys solely using Dhcp fingerprinting for the most part?
Today,
or is there
yes.
anything else that you guys have in the works?
Yeah, look, there's plenty in the works. So we're probably going to be talking about that a bit more in the coming months. Yeah. So.
But as Cam said as well, you know, the DHCP fingerprinting is used for a role derivation, but we're not recommending that people use that to put somebody into a security role, right? So it's not DHCP fingerprint, bang, access to the network. You still have to get redirected to the whole enrollment workflow, which is when we can have some additional checks. So, you know, that really is a key phase of our profiling, if you like.
Yeah, we're using it more as a traffic grooming process to get you to an enrollment page where some of the other players in the market are using it as a definitive security method and flipping a VLAN. So, you know, it's questionable given, you know, the points you guys are making about how easy it is to, you know, spoof a MAC address or, you know, change a user agent string in a browser.
Or we've seen people use host names to try and do things, which, you know, seems a little crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to type my Windows 7 laptop into the host name of your iPad. So. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much where we got to with the demos. We didn't want to, you know, bog down with that too much. We wanted to leave some time for you guys to ask any questions. I don't think we had any follow-up slides.
No, that's so it's really opening up to Q&A. If there's any other questions, obviously we've had a few questions already. Yes.
For your DHCP fingerprinting, is it still a manual process where I have to go in and define all the fingerprints myself, or are you going to tie into a back-end database of fingerprints?
So.
Can you repeat the question, Stu, please?
So the question was, can we automate the signatures that are used for, or the fingerprints that are used from DHCP basis? So I believe today on the controller that's still a manual process, but we are working on making that user experience a bit richer.
Any other questions or scenarios you want to throw at us that you're seeing in the field? Like, we're obviously interested in your feedback as well as to, you know, are there any particular challenges in terms of onboarding that, you know, we might be able to address?
Not necessarily onboarding. I just have a question, like future vision related, like with Hotspot 2.0. Yeah. AmigoPod seems like it's built around a lot of workflows that are web-based, especially for guest access things. How do you see that changing once Hotspot 2.0 and secure guest access kind of becomes, you know, mainstream?
Yeah, so I mean, I still think there's a place for, you know, the captive portal and that presentation layer, whether it's so. Look, I still think we've got quite a bit of time before, you know, that really hits the mainstream in that sense. So we've got a few ideas up our sleeve. We'll let those trickle out over time.
So what's your licensing model? I'm curious. Is it by user? Is it by controller? Is it by server?
So with regards to the AmigoPod side of things, if you like, that's you know, license based on the number of concurrent authenticated users. So you can have 1,000 people in the database, if you like, but if only 10 of them are connecting and authenticating at once. I guess it depends where you're terminating the EAP, right? Because we're provisioning these TLS certificates, but they don't necessarily need to terminate on Amigo Pod, right? They may be terminating on a controller or somewhere else. So concurrent users. With regards to the Quick Connect sort of configuration, that's done on endpoints.
I feel the need to whine and complain a little bit about Aruba licensing as a whole. So it's just too much. It's too complex.
Are you talking about controllers specifically, or?
Yeah, I mean controllers with features and just the whole scheme of licensing. It just seems too complicated.
You want to take that one, Kirti?
Yeah, I figured I'd step up for that.
We'll go this way.
Yes, I agree. I agree. So we are taking steps. We are taking steps to, actually a couple things. One, I think we had license creep as we added features. We have consolidated some of the licenses into smaller license packs. The most common ones that customers get interested in is the policy enforcement license and the wireless intrusion prevention. We call it RF Protect. Those are probably the two ones we have endeavored to basically, as we add new features, plug things into those two license packs. So you don't have to go beyond that for the most part.
I'll just throw something out here, specifically with regards to the PF license.
Yes.
I mean, all the installations I've done, I basically made it a rule within Accuvant to say, don't sell a controller without that license. To me, you can't get a basic level of functionality going without that license. Why have it separate?
Which one?
The PF license.
So the initial thinking behind it, to be honest with you, is differentiation in the marketplace. Because everybody, frankly, wireless controllers, Cisco wireless controllers, or whoever else you want to go with, Aruba wireless controllers, they think the same thing. What's different about an Aruba controller is that process that we just walked through. No other controller actually does that. So how do you assign value to something like that? And sometimes customers are not interested in the PEF license. I've seen education customers in particular say, I don't care about security or any of this fancy stuff. I just want to put wireless up. And in that case, they want the value out rather than baked in to the system. And so we have provided the flexibility to have a bare bones Wi-Fi system and the PEF system in place. Having said that, that's the past.
I can understand that.
That's the past.
I've come time and time again with customers who they've bought an Aruba control through like CDW.
Yeah,
they've been told this does everything you need, and then they find out they don't have.
Yes,
PEF
as we are scaling, as the whole market is growing and scaling, we admit that this is becoming a problem in administration, in ease of use, frankly. And we want to take steps to simplify the ease of use part, which is where the next steps are going to do. That will involve potentially absorbing the licenses into the base OS, and also centralized management, so that if you do licensing, you don't have to do it on a controller by controller basis. If you look at Aruba Instant, there are no licenses.
Right. Yeah.
So I mean, it doesn't make sense for that market, to be honest with you.
Nice and easy there.
Exactly. So we hear that loud and clear, and we are taking steps to migrate in that direction.
Well, we'll hold you to it.
Please do.
I'll try more.
Please do. Please do.
All right, so I guess just to wrap up, so you guys have got a bit of a break before the next one. Yeah, a couple of things we just want you to take away is, compared to some of the other players in the market, we have an awesome technology for allowing, essentially a zero-touch, onboarding process. You don't have to take your device to the help desk to get it on the network. So that's one key thing. Obviously, that's incredibly important in the traditional BYOD market of education, but more so now in pretty much everyone's network. The second one is, as you saw, we provisioned a unique credential to that device. It's not linked to your Active Directory username and password. So if your password expires, you're not being challenged, at that level. So that gives us a lot of benefits, not only in terms of usability, but also from the ability to be able to revoke access from that particular device. And like we're discussing before, potentially make authorization decisions. The example we got over here from having a corporate-owned iPad versus an employee-liable one. So there's a lot of benefits to that concept that's quite unique to us of having a unique credential on each device, which allows us to have all of those different flexible options in terms of authentication, authorization, and then obviously pulling the device off the network. So I think, you got any more closing comments? Yeah?
No, that's great.